Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and I'm going to spend a few minutes covering two different absolutely free photo editors. I tried out a lot of different apps to be able to make these recommendations. These were my requirements. I wanted to make sure that you could edit both raw pictures from your camera and JPEG photos. I wanted to make sure you could browse the folders on your computer and also edit the pictures within a single app without having to switch between apps. And I wanted to make sure that it worked on both Windows and Mac. So these two apps meet all these requirements. They're absolutely free to use, and they're both pretty good. Let's take a look at the first app, which is called Photoscape X. You can download it by visiting that URL, stp.io/px. I'm just going to open up a browser and go there real quick because downloading it, there's just a little bit of a trick that you have to know. So once I visit this link, you can see here, you'll either download it for Windows 10 or for Mac. And if you don't have Windows 10, I think it'll work for Windows 8 too, though. That should be a free update for you. If you're on like Windows 7 or Windows 98 or an older version of Windows, there is a version of Photoscape for you, but I don't necessarily recommend it because it doesn't seem to have very good RAW support. So if you click this or this, it'll take you directly into the store app. And what you'll see is a link to buy it for $30. But what you instead want is there'll be a little link that says like free trial. So click the trial button instead. I already have it installed, so you won't see it on this particular computer. Let's go ahead and launch Photoscape X. You'll notice that you'll see little plugs for things that you can do in the pro version of it. So there's a paid version, which is pretty inexpensive for photo editing apps. But we're just going to focus on the free capabilities that they give you in what is an unlimited trial version. They call it a trial, but it doesn't expire. You can see, you can browse all your drives and files here. So presumably you've already imported your files onto your computer. And I've made a folder here with a bunch of samples taken with different types of cameras, different resolutions, different conditions, and I use these to test it. Up at the top here, you have a favorites grouping. So what you can do is just grab your folder that you frequently go to and drag it up to your favorites. That way, the next time you open Photoscape, you can immediately just jump there really quickly. You'll see a lot of tabs at the top for different tools that Photoscape includes. Right now we're in the viewer, which is an easy way to view your different apps. And you can see I can change the thumbnail size down here. I can also change the sort order. I can switch different views. This is more of a loop view. Sometimes it'll take a second or two to load the picture. The particular file it's loading right now is a 50 megapixel file, so it's really big. So these little buttons here give you different views, and this is a completely immersive full screen view, like a slideshow view. Again, it's going to take a second to load, but it will pop up. There we go. And you can go between the different pictures this way. So I'll close out of that and let's get to the good stuff, the editor. If your folders disappear, just click the X there and it'll close it out. Thumbnails. Now I'll go to the editor tab. And this looks very similar. Instead of showing a grid of the different photos on this pane, you'll see the pane with the different photos is down here. So let's click this portrait. This is another very high resolution photo taken at 50 megapixels, but Photoscape does a pretty admirable job of processing that massive file, even though this computer isn't especially fast. As you navigate it, in the editor, you'll see 6 different tabs over here. The one that will be highlighted by default is Edit, and this gives you access to a lot of useful tools. These tools down here that say Pro over them, those require the paid version of the software. So I'm not going to use those. You don't actually need many of those tools. You can get everything done with the free tools down here. I'll show you a couple of tricks in the edit pane real quick. Most pictures can be improved by just clicking auto levels. This popped up a little dialog here, and I can make a little bit of an adjustment here. Now, if I want to see the before and after, what I'll do is I'll hold down the compare button here. So as I do that, you can see it's switching between the before and after. And indeed, I always do this just to make sure that whatever I edit I just applied makes the picture better. And I like it better in this new version. So I'll click apply. You'll make a change and then you'll click the apply button. It does not edit your original photo. In fact, you can't ever overwrite RAW photos. You can't overwrite JPEG photos, but you should always make a point of saving it to a new file anytime you make edits. I'll also click the auto contrast here. That didn't make a huge difference. There is a problem with this picture. You can see that the color is kind of off. So I'm going to hit the white balance clicker here. And this is kind of using a dropper. So what I need to do now is to pick a white part of the picture. And I know her dress is pretty close to white. It's technically off-white, but we'll see. Okay, that did a pretty good job of automatically fixing the color problems in the picture. You can see the before and after, got less green. I'll click apply. Now, there's still a problem. The picture is underexposed. Her face is really dark. I could fix this by clicking the click menu here, and you can see brighten, darken. So I could go click brighten high, and that would fix it. There's actually a better way to do it. I'll click the color tab. We'll go on to the next tab now. And you can see a lot of sliders in here. So let's click the brighten slider and just drag it up and try to get this a little more properly exposed. It's pretty amazing how drastically you can edit RAW files. If a picture is a couple of stops underexposed, it doesn't mean it's lost. You can do a really good job of recovering it. And you'll see a lot of different sliders here. And the best way to get to know these sliders is really to experiment with them. Brighten and darken are pretty self-explanatory. Deepen is kind of their intelligent version of contrast, and I like it a lot. So this picture really could use more contrast. So I'm going to slide that deepen slider to the right. And there's no formula for this. It's to taste, you know, it's like a master chef doesn't follow a recipe step by step. They just kind of know how much salt a particular recipe needs. And it kind of works like that. The clarity tool will just kind of accentuate detail in a photo, and it can work great with landscape photos, or it's fantastic for wildlife photos. You usually don't want to add a lot of clarity to a portrait because it would accentuate the texture in the face. Vibrance is a fancy name for saturation, just a more intelligent saturation. And I just want to kind of bring that until her skin tones look nice and natural. Dehaze is more useful for landscape photos. You'll see it'll just kind of add contrast to it, but this picture definitely does not benefit from dehaze. We'll take a look at some pictures later that definitely will. Now, you'll see two tools, lighten shadows and darken highlights. So if I wanted to bring up more texture in her hair, I could do lighten shadows, and you can see it is definitely bringing out detail that is otherwise lost in her hair. I don't need to raise the exposure of the entire picture when I do that, however. One thing that would benefit this picture is darken highlights. This will take the brightest parts of the picture and bring their exposure down towards the middle exposure. And here, her dress, we've lost some of the detail here. It might be a little bit overexposed. So I'm just going to drag the darken highlight slider up, and you can just see how much detail we recovered in her dress there. Now, you'll see some other sliders down here. This is closed by default. There are other, even more complex options that are hidden. Click that plus symbol and you can see even more options. Like if I want to raise the exposure even further, I can drag the exposure slider to the right, and maybe indeed it should be a little bit brighter. And if the color temperature is still off a little bit, I can fix it by moving the slider here. So if my picture were really blue, I'd drag it to the left. If my picture were warm, if it were orange, I'd drag it to the right where it's blue there. But basically, you'll just look at the picture and kind of drag it around until things look natural. I want to leave this a little bit warm, but I think I did improve the overall color temperature. So I'll close that, and now let's click the compare button to see the before and after. So you can see by adjusting the sliders, I made a really dramatic difference in the picture. So now I'll click apply. Sometimes you don't want to apply a change to an entire photo, but you want to apply it to just part of the picture. let's say we wanted to bring out some detail in her hair. I'm going to go down here and just zoom in 1:1. So you can see this slider here allows you to zoom in and out. Let's go here and just click 1:1, and let's try to bring up some of this detail. I'm going to go back to the color slider here. Now you can see this suddenly got less sharp. It's saying here preview fast draft. This is Photoscape's way of making sure everything still moves quickly. So when you do this in the color tab, things get blurry, but it's not permanent. As soon as you click, make your changes and click apply, it'll go back. I want to use a mask. So what the mask will do is allow me to apply changes to just part of the picture. Let's zoom back just a little bit so we can see more of her hair. And so my goal here is to bring up the shadows in her hair. So I'm going to just paint this brush over her hair. This is the most useful masking tool here, which is the brush symbol. So I've clicked that. You can also just make a big circle that is the brush. And if you want to see the mask, click the show mask checkbox there. So let's go ahead and just paint these shadows in. So with that, what I wanted to do was to lighten the shadows some. So I'm going to drag this lighten shadows slider up here. And you can see, whereas before it made the whole picture really bright, now it's just bringing up the texture in her hair. If you happen to paint somewhere where you didn't want to, click this little brush minus button here, and now you can undo it. There you go. So that just is an eraser. Let's go back to the brush plus button here, and let's pan over to the other side of her hair, and we'll just raise the shadows on this part of her hair too. And I'm being sloppy with it. You can adjust the brush size up or down by using this slider here. See the brush size, and hardness defines how hard the edge of it is. So with a low brush hardness, it's going to be smoothly blending into the unpainted parts of the picture. And with a high brush hardness, it's going to have very sharp edges to where you paint. Usually a low brush hardness is going to give you the most natural results. So I brought up highlights in a couple of spots on her hair. Let's zoom back so we can see more of the picture. And we'll hit that compare button to see the before and after. So you can see just how powerful masking is there. And basically I just dodged a couple spots in her hair to bring out some of the texture. Raw files have a lot of that detail hidden in them, and it can make such a difference in the pictures. So I'll click apply. Things look crazy for a second. Okay, there we go. And it brought me back into the edit tab here. Let's go full screen with this. So we're almost kind of done with this picture. If you want to see the original, you can click original there and you'll undo all of your different edits. Maybe one last thing we can do is a little bit of crop, because it just wouldn't be me if I didn't crop it a little bit, right? So let's crop this down a little bit, and now I can drag that frame and maybe too tight. Loosen it up a little bit. And then I'll click crop here. One thing to know about the crop dialog, when you click this, you see you can change your aspect ratio. So if you clicked 1:1, it would be cropping square, like Instagram. Normally for me, I click original and try to keep the aspect ratio the same. So this is our finished picture. If I click original, you can see a dramatic difference here. One last thing you have to do with this, you can't just switch away to a different picture. You'll lose all your edits. It'll warn you. It'll say, do you want to save your edits? But you always need to click save. So I'll click save here. And if you're working with a JPEG file, you could overwrite it, but I wouldn't recommend that. I would always recommend clicking save as to save it as a new file. So by default, it's saving it in the same folder that I opened it from. It just took the original file name and added a .jpg. JPEG is the format that you're probably going to use all the time. It's compressed, it's easy to share, it works on any sort of device. We've edited this picture pretty well. Let's go and click over here to pull up our folder view, and let's look at a landscape picture. This is a really challenging landscape photo because it was taken at a high ISO, so we'll need to do a little bit of noise reduction. It also, I took it at a moonrise, and the moon is very, very bright. It was a harvest moon. So this is just a straight out of the camera raw file. And I think the first thing I want to do is crop this down. So again, I have original selected here. I'm just going to crop this pretty tight and then drag that crop. And I'll click crop here. And you can see right now that the picture's nice, but it's kind of washed out. Let's first start with auto levels. That didn't work for me at all. I'll try auto contrast. That did improve things, so I'll go with that change. Now I'll jump over to the color tab. And let's try deepen. Really just want to try to make this look good. Dehaze might help here a little bit. Yeah. And this moon is a little blown out, so let's darken those highlights. Just because the contrast is so great. Okay, so I dragged it up too high and you can see things get crazy. We don't want it to be crazy. I'm gonna try to brighten the whole image here. And when I do that, I might be able to darken the highlights a little more. Maybe more contrast. No. A little bit of clarity can help, I think. Just give it a little bit more pop. Click the more here and let's just try adjusting the exposure up or down. The temperature I can see, it's night, so it's a little bit blue, and that might be okay, but I will experiment with giving it a more neutral color balance. Okay, indeed, I think that looks a little bit better. So let's click compare to see the before and after. Well, you know what? I actually lost some detail in the moon there. All right, so there's a before and after. Let's click apply. And if we zoom into 1:1 here, what you'll see is just a ton of noise. And that's because I think I took it at ISO 3200 and it was dark. You can use noise reduction here and it will help a lot. You can use the reduce noise tool here. And you basically just, it's a very simple reduce noise tool. It just gives you one big slider, which is more or less noise. And the trade-off is, you can see with the amount down the lowest, things look nice and sharp. If I raise the amount really high, everything gets really soft, but then the noise starts to disappear. And if you can't find a good compromise where things still look good, then you're going to want to use the mask tool. So I'm actually going to do this in 2 stages. I'm going to apply some small amount of noise reduction to the whole picture. And then I'll click apply. And then I'm going to hit reduce noise again. And this time I'm going to use a mask. And I'm just going to apply this mask to everything, to the sky, because there's no detail in the sky, right? Therefore, if I just crank up the noise reduction in the sky, I won't really be losing anything because there's no detail to be lost. So we can be really careful about this. I painted over part of this here, so I just clicked the minus button and undid it. We can be really careful, but I don't want to waste your time. So I'm just going to do half the sky here, and you'll get the idea of what I'm doing. You always see more noise in dark areas of the picture. It's in the shadows, so there's not really going to be any noise in the moon because the moon is the brightest part of the image. In this case, the moon was about like 8 stops brighter than the lighthouse itself, which means it was getting 256 more times more light. All that light reflecting off the sun. Let me just clean up this mask that I went over on. So let's again zoom into 1-to-1 so we can see just how much noise we're applying to just the sky here. Now, because there's no detail back there, there's really nothing to stop me from just cranking it all the way up. Let's just go, okay, halfway there. So you can see just how dramatic that noise reduction is. I'll click apply. And let's step back and see the whole thing, compare it to the original. Quite a bit different, pretty clean. You can see the effect of the noise reduction over here versus over here. Even at this zoom level, it's obvious, but if you're gonna make a big print, it would be even more obvious. Once again, you wanna be sure to save your work or else you will lose it, because the next time you open up Photoscape X, you will not see your changes remembered. It does not store those changes and remember them. Let's edit a quick wildlife photo here. This is a picture of a little chick who was in my driveway and quite irritated with me. This is another 50 megapixel picture. It's a wren. I think this picture is cute cropped 1-to-1. So I'm going to select 1-to-1 there and then just drag a square crop around them. And I'll click crop. Now let's do the auto levels. That helped. Let's do the auto contrast. That helped too. Let's switch over to the color here and cool it down a little bit. He's a little too warm. Maybe a little clarity here could help. Yeah, that helps. Deepen it a little more contrast. After all, he seems like a really dramatic fellow, right? So I'll click apply and save that. And one thing I want to show you is the vignette tool, just a creative tool. You can just kind of darken the corners, and it gives a more vintage kind of old-timey feel to it, because old cameras used to always have the dark corners, so it gives it more of a classic look. But it also focuses the viewer's attention on the middle of the picture, so that's one thing I like about it with that particular picture. So I'll do that and click apply, and I feel pretty happy about this. I'll take a few minutes just to show you some of the other cool tools in here. The film tool here is like an Instagram filter, so you can quickly apply a collection of different edits. And if I just hover my cursor over each of these, I get a preview of what they look like. And I will almost always do this with a picture as creative inspiration. It doesn't mean I have to use one of these presets exactly as it is, but maybe I'm flipping through and I click at this and I'm like, oh, you know what? I like it with this faded look. It seems to match the style of it. If you scroll down further, you can see they have more presets that are marked with the Pro, so you can kind of preview them and maybe they'll lure you into paying for the full app, but you really don't need to. I'll just show you that there are a couple of tabs up here. Light leaks is kind of cool. You see, you can just add these like as if your camera was faulty, but it just adds kind of creative overlays. And duotone just has another set of a little more dramatic filters that you can apply. The frames tool here will just basically add picture frames to your picture if that's the kind of thing you're into. You see, you can crop it to different shapes and you can apply different borders. The insert tool here allows you to, for example, add text to it. When you add the text, you're going to type in here. And then you can drag it around. Real clever, Tony. Let's delete that. And that pretty well sums up Photoscape Pro. You'll notice there are some other tabs up here. There's a batch tab that will process multiple pictures simultaneously with the same set of settings. You can create a collage combining multiple pictures. You can create a GIF. If you shoot a sports event and you're on a continuous shutter and you fire off, 20 shots at a time, you could take those 20 shots and stack them into a GIF, which is like a little mini movie without sound. It's a cool thing to do if you happen to have a sequence of shots. You can print your images here. It just does a good job of interfacing to the printer. And that pretty much sums up Photoscape X. Again, this version is free for Windows and Mac. Go to sdp.io/px. It's my favorite app. It's the one I recommend to most people for free apps. If you really are good at computers, I know a lot of my audience has a background in IT, you're going to like Raw Therapee. If you are into tuning and tweaking stuff, Raw Therapee is free. You can get it from sdp.io/raw therapy. And don't worry if you spell therapy correctly, it'll still get you there. This also requires a little bit of instruction just to get it downloaded correctly. But let's go to my shortcut, and this is the downloads link here. So I click downloads here, and what you're going to see is this long list of files. And so already it's kind of a nerdy experience, right? There's not a big I have Windows link. You have to look at this and know, okay, I have Windows or Mac, that's easy, but do you have 64-bit or 32-bit? And do you want the debug version or the fast version? Most of you, well, if you have Windows or Mac, hopefully, most of you are going to want the 64-bit fast version here. And to get it to download, you actually have to click like this green arrow. So this is the version I want. The debug version, it's going to be a little bit slower. You really don't want it. It's now going to download a zip file to my computer. You can see it down here at the bottom. And when this is done, zip file just compresses multiple files into a single file. On Windows or Mac, you can open up zip files by default, but it's built into the operating system. So I've opened up that zip file. I'm just going to right click it and click open, and then Windows prompts me to run it. But you'll have a similar experience on Mac. You might get warnings that the app isn't from the approved app store, but I haven't had any problems with it. So now it's actually going through the install process, and it should launch the installer. Make sure you thoroughly read that license agreement. I'm a really fast reader, so I'm just gonna, there we go. Click next, and then I'll click install. I already have it installed. I just wanted to make sure that you know how to do that, because it's a different, more unusual type of installer. Once you get Raw Therapee installed, it's gonna look familiar, almost like Photoscape X, in that we have a list of shortcuts up here and then folders that we can browse down here. So you'll just browse to wherever you've copied your pictures to from your camera. I've selected the raw samples folder here. These places shortcuts are really useful. If you don't have your favorite place there, you can find it in the folders tab and then click plus and it will add it. So now I have my raw samples right here. Let's take a look at a different picture. Let's take a look at this landscape photo here. I'll just double click it. So it does a pretty good job of auto exposing it, because it automatically will turn auto levels on. So that does a pretty good job. And now you'll see a similar set of sliders. And Raw Therapee is a very powerful tool. And in fact, in some ways, it's actually too powerful, because I think a lot of these sliders are more than the average person needs. Like, look at the outrageous number of options. And that's the reason it wasn't my first pick, is most of my audience, they could be intimidated by this. But if you don't feel intimidated, then you go for it. We get a histogram up here that's split between red, blue, and green channels, as well as the white channel here is showing the sum of all three. So we'll start by adjusting the exposure. The black levels allow you to control the darkest point in the picture. So if you raise it to the right, you can see everything becomes a silhouette, and you add a lot more contrast to it. So it's good to have a nice solid black point in there. Highlight compression will reduce the brightness of the brightest parts of the picture. So because there's so much dynamic range in this picture, the bright sky versus the shadow of this stone, it's a good idea to just kind of lower the highlight compression and then raise the exposure of the entire image. It didn't handle this especially well, so it's all kind of getting washed out. So I'll undo some of that. You don't want to lose too much contrast. Let's adjust the contrast up some. Maybe we can cover the highlights a little more. And this could actually use a little more saturation. If you have shadows that you want to bring up or darken, you can use shadow compression. So dropping that will make everything a little contrastier. Okay, good. So we've done a pretty solid job of editing that, and I think things look pretty good. There are other sliders here for adjusting the highlights and shadows, the local contrast here. You can see there are a lot of really powerful options here that most professional photographers have never seen before. If you feel like getting into those, you go for it. I'm not going to show you all that stuff. There's a series of tabs up here. The exposure tab is for exposure. It gets all the basic stuff done. The sharpening tab can be really useful to just add a little more pop. So let's zoom into 1:1 here. There we go. I'm just panning around to find something to look at. And you can see it's a pretty sharp picture, but we can drag up the amount here to add a little more pop to it. At some point, if you go too high, you'll notice that the edges have a little unnatural kind of edge to them. So you want to back off that. Just go to the part where it looks more natural. Sharpen only edges is a useful feature, but it doesn't always work. You can see it, you have to like tune it. So you can put some time into that and actually get higher quality sharpening out of that. There's a noise reduction section down here, which, you know, this image really doesn't have bad noise reduction, or doesn't have a need for noise reduction. Let's zoom back to see the whole image. Now, with Photoscape X, if I switched away to a different picture, I would lose all my changes. But the nice thing about raw Therapee is it will remember all of your changes. That's terribly useful. Let's take a look at a night photo, which has some serious color problems here. I'm going to click the color tab here and use this dropper to try to fix the white balance. This works similar to just about every photo app. And you can also see that it's kind of off level. So let's go into the cropping tool here. And I'll click the crop button. And the way the crop tool works is a little weird. You have to kind of grab the edges. So let's crop that down first. And once you crop, it won't make the edges kind of disappear, but you can click this button here to fit the crop to the screen. So it kind of zooms back in for you. If I scroll down some here, there's the rotate slider. So now I can just grab that and just rotate it until stuff looks level. Okay, good. Let's go back to the exposure here. And you can see this is all completely blown out. What we can do is drag the highlight compression to the right and see if any of that can be recovered. And it looks like it can't. So sometimes you'd be able to see some level of detail. You can see like some details lost there, but you can see like that piece of wood there. So it's not all lost. Nonetheless, we managed to straighten it, fix the colors, and add some much needed contrast to that photo. I hope that was helpful. To summarize, Photoscape X is the best tool for most people. The big downside is it doesn't save edits between sessions. So you always have to save your file as a JPEG. And if you want to go back and make one little change, you kind of have to start from scratch if you're working with a RAW file. Raw Therapee saves your edits between sessions, so it's more powerful that way. But the interface is so flexible that it can often be overwhelming. So if you didn't find that demonstration overwhelming, if you don't mind lots of extra sliders, Raw Therapee might be a better option for you. Hope this is helpful. Please subscribe, share this link with your friends. And if you really want to learn the art of photography, it's not about sliders and buttons and dials. It's about lighting and mood and expression and timing and subject matter and composition and color. So get my book, Stunning Digital Photography. You can get the ebook version for only $10. And they're all available in paperback too. And if you do decide to step up to professional editing tools, you can get books on Lightroom and Photoshop. Thanks so much. Bye.